Tips from Trestle is brought to you by the Boelter Companies, Navigator Group Purchasing, and eMenuChoice Point of Sale. Welcome to Tips from Trestle, the Senior Living Food and Hospitality Podcast. This podcast explores the senior living industry with a unique focus on food, hospitality, and the community experience. I'm your host, Aaron Fish. During 3 decades in the hospitality industry, I focused my work on creating exceptional experiences for the customers we serve. My goal for this podcast? Educate, inform, and inspire leaders in senior living. How? By creating hospitality with a purpose, by bringing the customer experience to the front of mind in our industry. We should bring the passionate spirit of food and hospitality to everything that we do and everyone we serve each and every day. So what are we waiting for? Let's get to it. My guest today on Tips from Trestle is Chris Reeves. Chris is the Senior VP of Sales, Strategic Channel Development for the Middleby Corporation. Chris started working alongside his family in the restaurant industry. After school, he took a slightly different path and worked with restaurants supplying food and smallwares to their business, working with one of the nation's largest broadline distributors. Wanting to expand his services, he joined one of the large equipment dealer roll-ups, offering more services with equipment, design, and selection. Ultimately joining Middleby, which is a multi-brand equipment manufacturer, he focused on solving challenges in our industry with equipment innovation. Chris, thanks for joining me today on Tips from Trestle.
Aaron, thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
So, a lot of our listeners are very familiar with a lot of the companies that are providing this, but I wasn't familiar with what Middleby did until, we connected and started talking about doing the podcast. And so can you give us a little more background on what Middleby does, who they are, and what your focus is?
Yeah, absolutely, Aaron. Middleby may not be a household name. It's made up of some of the most trusted and iconic brands in the industry. Brands like Pitco, Logic, TurboChef, Selfman, just to name a few of our brands. Middleby focuses on solving customer challenges through the use of technology, and we rely on the voice of the customer to develop specific equipment solutions to meet their needs.
Yeah, and when we were chatting about Middleby, one of the things, and it's here in my own backyard, so shame on me for not knowing about it, but you guys have what's called the Middleby Innovation Kitchens. And I've seen the space. It is amazing. It kind of blew me away when I first saw it. And so I'd love to kind of talk a little bit about that, because I think there's a lot of value in not just looking at the equipment, but the way you've set it up, the way it's designed, how it functions. And so let's dive into that. What is the Middleby Innovation Kitchen?
Yeah, great question. It's a 40,000 square foot Disneyland for restaurateurs, senior living, anyone in the food service industry to really look at equipment a different way. Equipment selection in the past was pretty one-dimensional, right? We meet with our dealers, dealer partners. They would identify possibly a piece of equipment they thought might fit the need. But the only time you would really engage the equipment is after it was installed, unless you were lucky enough to see it at a show or maybe tested at that dealer's test kitchen.
Yeah.
So Middleby Innovation Kitchens being 40,000 square foot, there's 16 different vignettes with about 160 different pieces of active cooking equipment. It's not a show floor. This is where people actually come in and test their processes to choose the right piece of equipment.
Yeah, it's not a test kitchen. You mentioned like equipment test kitchens, and I've been to those. I've gone to the ones and distributors that I used to work with, and they're, they meet the purpose, and, they've got a lot of great things. But this is a huge investment, obviously, for Middleby. And so why did you see the value? Why did Middleby decide to make this huge investment in a 40,000 square foot space to be able to show off the equipment the way you do?
It's interesting, right? as I mentioned earlier, equipment selection was going to a show, maybe looking at an oven. Let's choose a convection oven as an example.
Yeah.
You'd open up the doors, they look inside of it. Those are all show pieces. Um, but does that piece of equipment meet that customer's specific needs? They don't know that until they really run it through a test. So the Middleby Innovation Kitchens is a little different. We have a lot of different brands inside the Middleby portfolio. Take a look at one of our baking vignettes. We have 4 different manufacturers there where you can test side by side the performance of each one to find out the exact fit for the customer's challenge, right? How does it answer that customer's challenge? So that is completely different mindset than going to a test kitchen or going to a show. Equipment investment has changed a lot over the years. Technology has also caused equipment costs to go up. But are we really able to utilize 100% of that product unless we really test it to their processes? And that's where the Middleby Innovation Kitchens come in. We want the guests to bring their menu. We want them to come to us with specific challenges. It's not just an equipment testing facility. We're lucky enough to have some of the world's greatest chefs. The Middleby Innovation Kitchens run by a certified master chef, which there are roughly about 80 in the world.
Yeah.
Okay?
Wow.
And there's other chefs there from the brands that can leverage their experience, share that with whomever's testing the piece of equipment to really give them a complete experience to answer what their challenge is.
Yeah. I see my wheels are spinning just of all the things that I could do in a space like that. And so, but one of the things that I have found very valuable in my career is as I'm developing new menus or restaurant concepts. One time I was working with a distributor and I was developing this cafe concept, and we did this whole dog and pony show. Like, here's all these great products you can use, and we were able to touch and feel them, and we were in their test kitchen, but we really couldn't like flex what we could do. But having a space like what you have for when it comes to kitchen design or menu develop, I think is really important. And so, what kind of feedback do you get from customers when they go into a space like the MIK? Today, I want to tell you about one of Tressel's senior living partners, Boelter. Boelter is a food service design, equipment, and supply company that has been providing expert guidance to the food and beverage industry for nearly a century. A strategic partner to the most successful food service operations in the country, Boelter provides support in kitchen and bar design, equipment procurement and install, and supplies. Their team of senior living food service experts have experience across the continuum of care. From independent living to skilled nursing and CCRCs, Boelter specializes in right-sizing new facilities, modernizing remodels, and providing the right food service equipment and supplies. At Boelter, they are committed to creating memorable experiences for their customers and their guests. With their top-notch team and a global network of quality supplier partners, their customer-focused approach is built on a foundation of collaboration and decades of industry experience. So thank you for considering Boelter for all of your food service needs. I know that's your guys' nickname for it.
Yeah.
When they go into a space like that and they see all these different vignettes and the different stations where you can try out baking or grilling or all of the different things.
Great question. But before I kind of answer that, I want to share a little bit with you too. While we have all these vignettes, we have one vignette that is one of my favorites called Ad Hoc. It is literally a whiteboard room with ventilation, with electricity, with gas, plumbing, that we can actually build out their line specific to their layout. So we can bring their equipment in to test right alongside of our equipment, or we can bring our equipment in from one of the vignettes into that particular space. We had a client came in once and they were struggling with layout, right? They're trying to get menu timing down, which may or may not be as important to the senior living segment as it may be to some other ones. But, the worst 5 minutes of anyone's life is when the guest next to you gets their food and you don't. So timing is critically important. So we were working with this client in the ad hoc area. We laid out the equipment to the way they thought it would work best for them. And then we realized they're crossing over people
Yeah.
too regularly. So we actually moved things around in a real world environment before we started building the restaurant, or in this case, the kitchen. So when it went to development, there was no change orders, there was no relocation of services. The execution was at a very high level. So
Yeah.
that's an area that I think at times gets forgotten is, customizing it to the guest experience. But to answer your question, what's the feedback? They're absolutely amazed at their ability to test processes with and almost endless resources, right? We
Yeah.
have a lot of equipment to test and use. But as I mentioned, we've got those world-class chefs. They're there to challenge and share ideas. We all learn together. I'll give you a really interesting one that kind of blew somebody's mind. We were talking to an operator, and it was Turbo Chef we were talking about. It's an oven called Double Match, commonly used for flatbread pizzas, perhaps quick sandwiches, maybe some baking. But we wanted to test the legs of this product, so we actually cooked a tomahawk steak in a
Yeah.
double batch speed oven. Okay, it was sous vide, but what we did is we showed that operator that the equipment has a lot of different facets to it. Something they may never have been able to test in their environment because we had a chef right there going, "Hey, let's tweak this, let's tweak that." When we left, the process was down for them to use a sous vide product in that double batch. So when they made the investment in that piece, not only did they find there was speed of service improvement, but also menu elasticity, which was critically important because today's today's residents, today's guests, they're expecting a heightened level of experience, and the equipment has to be flexible enough to do that. And that's where the MIK really comes in and shines because we can make it as specific to a training or testing that you want, or we can go into that whiteboard room, if you will, and say, okay, let's do some crazy stuff right here. We've got the chefs, we've got the experts. Let's run the equipment through its paces.
Yeah, that's such I love that story. I mean, I have similar experience where I had a turbo chef oven in an operation, and everybody's like, "We don't know what to do with this, right? Like, you can't figure it. It's not a microwave, but it's not an oven." And so I was like, "Watch this." And so with some of even with the presets, we were cooking salmon fillets, and I don't remember the exact time, but I feel like I took a frozen salmon fillet and in like under like 2.5 minutes, I had it
Oh,
like
yeah,
perfectly cooked, and it was
yeah.
just mind blowing to see that and what you're talking about with being able to go in and try new ideas and test things out makes a lot of sense. And I love that you have a space where you can basically build a kitchen, like tens of thousands of dollars in change orders saved just by being able to spend an afternoon in there moving pieces around and seeing just how things work. So it's such a great thing. One of the things though that your story kind of triggered me to think about is the process, right?
Mhm.
Because obviously, a space like that is really great for figuring out kitchen design. But we talked as we were kind of planning. You had some other great stories where it kind of was more than just finding the right piece of equipment, where it really turned into the process from start to finish on how things are done. And so I'd love to hear kind of what that looks like on your end and how you've seen the MIK help operators with their process evaluation.
It's interesting. So a couple of weeks ago, we had a guest in to the MIK, and it was a burger concept. And their challenge was to how do they deliver a fresh burger to their customer in about 4.5, 5 minutes. So they were looking at a whole different slew of options. And ultimately, what we settled on is what we call a clamshell grill. So it's a dual cooking surface. The griddle itself cooks, and then there's a hood that comes down and cooks both surfaces at the same time called a clamshell.
Yeah.
So we were actually able to take their cook time from 9 minutes down to about 4 minutes. But what was interesting is during that process, we actually built an order, right? So fries, burger, a mixed order itself. So we got the burger out in 4.5-ish minutes, but then we realized all the other food items that were on the plate weren't coming out at the same time.
Ah,
So we
yeah.
actually solved one problem and exposed another problem. So we kind of pushed the bottleneck down. So by using the MIK, we were able to develop, a process of when to drop the fries so it's delivered at the same time as that burger. And oh, by the way, how do you build backup for your fries using a Carter Hoffman crisp and hold fry warming system so you can kind of manage those ebbs and flows? Because if they would have bought this clamshell grill and installed it, their burgers would out in just the right amount of time that they want. The fries wouldn't, the other menu
Yeah.
items wouldn't. So they really didn't solve their problem. They just invested money and exposed a problem downstream. Processes are critically important to looking and working through these menu items at the MIK.
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm sitting here listening to you talk about cutting that time in half and thinking, how many dollars do you get back for that, right? Like, how can I make that time? How much happier are those residents going to be if they know that? But you would have assumed that the just the piece of equipment to make the burger come out faster would solve the problem. But in kind of doing the process, which you can't necessarily do in a test kitchen, right? Because you don't have the flexibility like you have with the MIK of the different spaces and trying different
Right?
equipment out. And so it's I can see the full value of saying, man, we probably need to rethink our whole kitchen. And it becomes a bigger kind of overview of I need to make this right so that way it makes my kitchen more profitable, more efficient, and more effective for my employees. So
Yeah, there's a ton of challenges that your operators have today, right?
Navigator is the largest full-service GPO that exclusively focuses on the senior living community. And what that means is we provide products and services that help our members provide a great environment for their residents, such as like MRO, hospitality equipment, food, business products, as well as technology solutions. We actually surround our members with a level of support unmatched in the industry.
Food cost, labor cost, many of them want to spend more time in front of the guests, the residents, right?
yeah,
So automation can be as big as you want with that clamshell grill that we talked about, or automation can be smaller bites, right? Look at one of our iconic brands, Globe, right? A slicer. We all sit at a slicer and we move that carriage back and forth. Well, maybe automation by going to an automatic slicer and allowing the machine to operate on its own and then repurpose those minutes to something else, right?
yeah,
Minutes matter in a kitchen. But also, the other nice thing about automation is automation can help you identify true food cost and true menu cost, right? Because
yeah,
automation gives you hyper consistency that perhaps manual intervention doesn't always allow you to have. It also gives, which is critically important to your customers, in many cases, a well-planned automated kitchen can help you with a HACCP plan,
yeah.
making sure temperatures are accurate. So if there ever is a challenge with anyone having a foodborne illness, they go right back to the source, identify it, work through it, and make sure it doesn't happen again.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up the talking through automation and the technology piece because as an industry, there's so much being talked about and so much being like shared about how we need to embrace more technology and more technology. But usually when you get into the food service, the kitchen is an area where we don't really talk about it, right? It's very much like, oh, well, the kitchen just needs to be the kitchen, right? We need the grill, we need the slicer, we need the oven. I mean, I don't know how many design plans I've seen recently where it's still that, right? It's like we still have these basic pieces of equipment.
Yeah.
Even thinking of like a convection oven or a combi oven, right? Where you can pre-program, you can set all those settings. You've probably got 15 different versions in the MIK, and then you can help someone go in and not just learn how to use the programming, but really truly, here's our recipes, here's our menu. We need to pre-program that so those people can be doing more of those touch points with residents. I love
You know,
that.
Aaron, that's a great point. So we all have these smartphones, right?
Yeah.
Um, and we get these smartphones, and what do we immediately do? We use about 10% of its abilities, right? Because we don't know how or what the other 90% is because we just haven't been exposed to it before. So, how do we learn how to use our cell phone to a greater degree? We talk to friends, we show shortcuts. This is where the MIK comes in because we can actually show them the 90 other percent of the oven
Yeah.
uh, or cooking vessel, whatever the item is, so they can really leverage it. We can show them, I don't want to call them tricks, we can show them abilities to still allow a chef influenced menu item, but yet build recipes in there so that chef can take a day off. Or
Mm.
when that chef is busy doing something else, they can be assured that that same menu that they slaved over for days developing every little minute detail is the same when they're there and when they're not there.
Yeah.
It's a heightened level of experience for the guests and for the residents.
No, that consistency piece is so important, right? And I think technology can help you solve that, right? Because
Mhm.
while I think it's critically important to have that human influence on the menu and on the process, the more of that you take out, honestly, you're going to get more consistency, right? Because that recipe pre-programmed in the oven is going to make sure that it's done the same way every single time. It's going to follow the right steps. Whereas that human cook might add an extra minute of time here or half a minute less here. And so it's just not quite the same. And so I think it's critical, especially when you think about the impact this can have on like training and development of staff
Mhm.
um, as you're going through, because we know labor and staffing is a challenge where it's getting better, but it's not where we want it to be. And so these shortcuts or these opportunities to streamline processes, I think is so critical in the kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah. So many times people talk about automation, they immediately go to robots.
Right.
Middleby has robots too, but I want to make sure everyone looks at innovation a little differently. It can be in innovation and automation can be as simple as that slicer that we talked about, right? It might be, as food costs continue to go up, maybe it's another piece of equipment that they can introduce to not change the food quality, but to actually improve food quality through automation.
Yeah. I just sit here and think about, I just go back to your slicer, what I can see operators and developers and people who are paying the big dollars, the CapEx spend, thinking, well, that automated slicer is going to cost me a couple extra $100. And I know that if I drop 100 here or 500 here, like my kitchen becomes more expensive. But what they don't see or to factor in is that, well, that slicer is saving me 5 minutes of time with an employee. And if they're slicing something twice a day or three times a day, well, now I've just saved 30 minutes a day. And what is that in labor cost? You get those extra dollars back in no time when you're doing that. Or you can turn around and reinvest it in how do I show my staff to do the things before we go? So it's such a great like visual and understanding of the whole process.
Automation can also be used for recruitment too. So think of this: if you had a choice of taking two positions inside of a facility, okay, position that's got automated equipment that really takes care of some of the labor intensive items and allows you to focus on creativity and customer engagement, right?
Yeah.
Or the other environment where it's a very static, requires a significant amount of labor. Um, the choices of that chef wanting to go to the more automated environment because it's a better working experience may help in a recruitment phase. So there's a lot of benefits to innovation and automation that are above and beyond just labor savings. It's also, improvement of employee morale and employee engagement.
But Chris, I think that's a really great way to kind of bring all of this together and really understand what Middleby and the MIK does. And so As we wrap up, how can listeners learn more about that work that you're talking about and the work that you do and really tap into your experience and the expertise that's available with the MIK?
Yeah, great question. Obviously the first call is to Boelter. And I'll tell you why. Equipment has changed over the years, right? Whether you need a consultation for a replacement piece of equipment or complete redesign, Boelter will come in and really evaluate what your needs are. There's a reason why 6-burner ranges are the number one sold range in the industry, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what they had before, but equipment has changed. Is that the right fit for that customer today? And professional like Boelter, through their design team, can really evaluate, is that the right process? Now, that process may take the guest to the MIK. It may take them to a design consultate with Boelter. Each conversation is unique, built around that customer's needs and desires. So the experts at Boelter are really the first step for people to start with.
No, that makes perfect sense. And I think it kind of gets you started on the process on getting where you need to be with your kitchen and equipment. So, Chris, if our listeners wanted to contact you, how would they do that?
So you can always reach out to me on my email, creeves@middleby.com. But ideally, the very best way to connect to me is through Boelter, right? They're going to be able to really understand your business and help me prepare the best offering through Boelter once I have a good understanding of what their business looks like.
Perfect. Well, Chris, this has been a great conversation. I've loved being able to deep dive into like this technology and this innovation in kitchen equipment and not being about robots. So, thank you for all your time today and for joining me today here on Tips from Trestle.
Great. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
So there you have it, another one in the books. Thanks again, everybody, for listening. Please follow, like, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Twitter @Tips from Trestle. You can also learn more about the work I do by following me on LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, and even TikTok. And be sure to check out Trestle Hospitality Concepts at www.trestlehospitalityconcepts.com. I'm your host, Aaron Fish, and this has been another episode of Tips from Trestle.